Hello there, it's Gina Gardiner and welcome to Gina Gardiner and Friends. I've got an amazing guest today, James Miller. If you are regular listeners to this
I,
Hello there, it's Gina Gardiner here and welcome to Gina Gardiner and Friends. I have a great guest for you today, James Miller, who's been a long-standing friend. And if you listen to AM FM 24/7 regularly, then you will have already met him because he has 3 shows a week. He's a licensed psychotherapist who's been in the mental health field for over 25 years. He's the host and executive producer of Lifeology and helps millions of people simplify their lives. And we're going to talk about his new book, but the principles behind it today. You are an expert in your life. Now, remember, I talk about you leading your own life. So there's huge resonance between the way in which James approaches things and I do. But we're going to explore how this can make a difference to your life. James, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Gina, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be a guest in your show today. So thank you once again.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So I'd like to just start by, how have you come to write the book? Because the book isn't the end, the beginning of things. It's sort of a culmination. So tell us your story.
Well, thank you. I started Lifeology about 8 years ago, and I was in the mental health field, like you said, for 25 years, but I had a private practice as well. And in my private practice, I realized there was a lot of similarities of what people were experiencing. And then once I left my practice and came to sunny Florida, I was doing a lot of my own self-development because, as we know, that's important and everyday thing for each of us to do. And I realized that there's some similarities in my own struggles that everyone around me was dealing with at the same time. So I started to formulate all these different concepts. And so when I started Lifeology, it started as on YouTube. And so for 6 months, every single day, I talked about one of these little snippets. And so 3-minute sessions or 3-minute segments that I would do. And so if you go back and listen, initially the production wasn't very good. Of course, it got better. But I really went through each of those things. And I would listen to what my peers were saying, listening to what my own self-talk was. And I started to create all these little life lessons. And then shortly after, when my radio show kind of blew up, all of a sudden I was really thinking about that in my own life. And I had some really difficult things happening, personal things that were happening. And I thought, wait a minute, James, this is not the first time you've experienced this before. The situation may be different, but the emotions I experienced are the same. I felt heartache. I felt grief. I felt bitterness. I felt all of these things. So when I had that epiphany in that dark time, I thought, wait a minute. Okay. So if I felt this before, how did I get over it? What would I do in the past that was healthy for me? What did I do in the past that was not healthy for me? Because I think, Gina, a lot of times when we're in the dark soul of the night and things are so overwhelming, we forget we've done healthy things before. So if you can take that split-second moment and reflect on when you felt the experience before, what did you do that was healthy? You don't have to reinvent the wheel in the moment. It gives you an opportunity to say, let me plug and play what worked before. And then if this worked, now I can tackle what's happening around me. That's how the book came about.
It's really interesting, isn't it? There's so much in just those few things you just said, how we have patterns of behavior and life seems to go in cyclical patterns and things continue to face us until we recognize that pattern and do something differently. And how often people are very successful in one area of their life, but fail to see that if they use the same approach and technique, in their personal life, for example, rather than just in their professional life, how life would be so much better.
Yes, that's very true.
I'd like you to explain to us how this is different to other self-help books. What is it, the essence of this, that gives people a real opportunity to do things differently?
As we know, there's so many wonderful self-help books out there, and I can name quite a few that have really resonated with me. I think the difference between other self-help books and this self-help book is you don't have to learn something new. There's, like I said, a lot of books when you read it, like, okay, let me try this, let me do this and this. Fantastic. But the majority of us, when we're really busy, we try and learn these new things, but we forget. We default back to our previous way of thinking or previous things. And so the reason why this book, Life Lessons, is different is because it helps people focus on what they've done. They are the expert in their life because they know what works for them. They know what doesn't work for them. So what I do in the book is after each chapter, which gives them a framework, then I help them reflect on, when did you experience this before? And once again, what worked and what didn't work. What's worked for you, Gina, in the past probably won't work for me, or maybe it will. But the thing is, the book is tailored for you to figure out what works for you. And that's how this book is different, because it really makes you stop and think of and take stock and responsibility for your actions and your behaviors, of ways to better yourself based on your previous data or your previous history.
I think that's so important, the taking stock, actually taking time to look at your life and be aware of the patterns, and then taking responsibility. And those who know me will know I bang on about taking radical responsibility for yourself
Yes.
all the time, because when you do, life changes. I'd like you to perhaps share with us examples of how either you've used some of these techniques in your own life and the impact,
Mhm.
or when you've used with clients, so people can get to see the practicality of this rather
Yes.
than just the theory.
Perfect. I remember, and this is a little self divulging here. I remember when I was younger, I went through a really traumatic breakup. And in that moment, it was incredibly difficult for me. Fast forward a few years later, another breakup. So that was the pattern I had. But in that moment, the second breakup, it was really difficult for me. And I did exactly what I'm saying here. I thought, all right, James, this is not the first time this has happened. You've been blindsided by life. And so when you're blindsided by life, what works before? And so I reflected on all the years I've been in relationships, et cetera. When I reflected on that, what worked to quote, get over it, and what did not work? What were the things that I did? And so in that moment, I had to really stop and take responsibility and really recognize, James, you're actually moving yourself to repeat the same pattern by doing those unhealthy things. And so in that moment, there's always a silver lining, but the silver lining only happens in the darkest cloud, which is something really important. So when I thought, okay, the silver lining here is now I have an opportunity to realize everything that I've done in my past, were those healthy things? And if they were a healthy response, then why am I repeating the same pattern? But then I realized maybe they weren't healthy responses of things I did. So there's multiple responses we can have to something. But when you can take a moment to reflect on this choice I'm making right now, I've done it before. What was a healthy return? What was the unhealthy return? So we can slow down and make sure every choice allows us to be the healthier version. Then that's when we break those patterns. And when we break those patterns, then we have a solid foundation for the next time life happens. Now, it may not be a breakup, but it can be blindsided by life in a different way. But that means I have the same emotions. Now let me plug and play what I learned in the solid foundation. And that becomes the essence of who I am moving forward. And I don't have to keep repeating those same behaviors or trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
That's absolutely great advice, Seth. Silver linings, deep dark days, and I know I've had a few of those myself, and looking for the gift in things, the silver linings, is something that makes a huge qualitative change in the way in which you live your life. So what does it mean for you?
Well, excuse me. In my book, Life Lessons, You Are the Expert on Your Life, it's a workbook. What that means for me is the reframe in life. Every event is like a jigsaw puzzle piece. When I go through my life, I can look at certain events and be like, oh, I love that event. Or other times like, oh, that's difficult. But when we use the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, when we put a jigsaw puzzle together, we know where the border goes. And then we can look at some of the images on the pieces, like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Some are really vibrant, some are really dark, don't even think that you go anywhere. But when you start to have that perspective and look at situations, one jigsaw puzzle piece links with another jigsaw puzzle piece, and then another and another. And pretty soon you start to see what's actually there. If we as an individual have a very myopic, in other words, a very close focus on something, I only look at that one jigsaw puzzle piece, I think, I don't know where this goes, or this is the ugliest color, I don't like this one. That's all I see. And so the silver lining is to get a little bit of perspective to say, all right, this piece all of a sudden opened up a door for this thing. And it caused me to have maybe a little bit more joy, or then it caused me to have a little bit more motivation. And so all of a sudden those pieces, which is time, starts to come together, and pretty soon I see something. So anytime someone is struggling with something, it's important not to emotionally forecast. One of the chapters in the book is called emotional forecasting. And unfortunately, emotional forecasting is what we take a snapshot of how I feel right now. If my life is full of despair, if my life is full of hopelessness, I take that snapshot and say, this is how my life is always going to be. And so when we cannot do that, it allows us to say, this is how I feel now. All I have to worry about is right now. What did I do in the past to help me through a feeling like this? And what can I do to move to the next moment? And so that allows for the reframe. But if we emotionally forecast that my life will always be this way, unfortunately, you're doing yourself a disservice, and it will feel so overwhelming because it does feel like there's no silver lining.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? How, first and foremost, that our perspective becomes our reality.
Yes.
You know, I'm sitting as we interview this, and behind the screen is my courtyard, and it's full of plants and green, and there's a beautiful clematis which is full of flower. But if I were to sit with my back to that, then I would be looking
Mhm.
at the business sign. And I think people forget that just shifting that perspective can give them a whole different view on life.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm reminded of the story of the man who is sitting on a train, and he's got two children with him,
Mm.
and the children are being an absolute pain in the what's-it. They're jumping on the seats, they're swinging from the handles. And people around are looking very disapproving, and their perspective is poor parenting, difficult children,
Mhm.
he ought to get a grip. But if I put another piece of information in there, which is he's just coming from the hospital where he's been told that his wife
Mm.
is terminally ill and she has days to live, people's perspective would soften, and they
Yes.
would
Yes.
recognize that things weren't always as they seem. And
Yes.
I think many people go very quickly into a conditioned perspective.
Mhm.
And if they can step out of that and think, well, as you say, nothing lasts forever. If
Yes.
I think about this, tomorrow's another day, the sun will come up. Let's just manage today. I think even the darkest, most difficult challenges become more manageable.
Yes, they certainly do. One to piggyback off of what you say, it reminds me of, for example, here's my phone here, and if I look at my phone here, those who can see me, I'm just looking at my phone, the screen. But if I turn the phone around, I can see the back of it, I can see the side of it, I can see all the different things. It's the same object, it's a phone, but I choose on which side of the phone I'm going to look. And so usually, of course, I'm conditioned to look at the front of it because that's where the screen is. Now I have business cards in the back of my phone. So if I need that, I turn my phone around. But what we forget is that's like any situation, whatever situation you're going through right now, and right now or the future, you have the opportunity to say, how can I spin this, or how can I move this in a way that it might be a little bit different? And when you think of it in slightly different, for example, getting more information, all of a sudden your reality shifts a bit. And if it shifts a bit, then it takes your emotions and takes it from I'm feeling it 100% to maybe I'm only feeling 80%. That 20% is a respite or a reprieve for you to say, okay, it still hurts, but it doesn't hurt as much. So if I can shift it a little bit, well, how can I shift it a little bit more and a little bit more? And pretty soon you're looking at it in a different way. And so now your perception is changed. And so if it's changed, once again, your emotions that you're struggling with will decrease significantly, and you'll be able to then find the the strength to do something different as well.
It's really interesting because one of the things that I've found through my life, and I've learned to walk twice as an adult. I've suffered bereavement and heartbreak as many people have done, is that when I look back over those situations, I can see the gift in them.
Hmm.
But what strikes me is that this is qualitatively different.
Yes.
You are looking at how in the moment you shift the perspective to look for incremental improvements.
Yes.
And I mean, once you've been through a number of iterations of challenge and recognize that the gift is there, then you start to look for them. But you're approaching it from a completely different angle. We're talking about changing
Of course.
perspective. And the power of it is you don't have to wait for time to get that hindsight.
Correct.
It's very
Correct.
much in the moment. And I think that
Correct.
makes it so powerful.
Thank you. And another way to do that is, for example, if I'm struggling with something right now, I'm like, I don't know, I don't see anything, how it can change. I can simply say, all right, I can't see it. But if I were to ask Gina, what would Gina say to help me shift it a little bit? Now, it may be hard for me to absorb what you say, but you're planting that seed within me. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how to see anything different. But Gina would say this. Okay, I don't believe it, but I can see it. Let me meditate on that for a few minutes. As we know, meditating is just simply thinking about something over and over again. It
Yeah.
could be anxious meditation, it could be healthy meditation. You choose what meditation is. So if I say, well, let me meditate on what Gina says, that then starts to shift my perspective a little bit. So if Gina thinks that's true, it might be true. Let me look at that. And that's a way to use someone else that you really trust, a healthy person, to be able to help you find that shift. Because in the darkest time, it's hard to find that shift. But the people around you, the people that you trust, will be able to help you start to push yourself a little bit further and start to see it in a different way.
And that brings up another issue, is that surrounding your people with people, not only people that you trust, but people who are open and optimistic and look for the positive.
Yes.
Because, if you are in a difficult place and you are with someone my father would call a Jeremiah, somebody who's a naysayer, that's not going to help you find a positive perspective in things.
Correct.
But having someone who, not a Pollyanna, not somebody who is, oh, it's just going to be fine, don't worry, but somebody who can give you an opportunity to say, have you thought about it from this angle? Or simply, it's going to
Yes.
pass. Give yourself a bit
Yes.
of time. So important.
There is a chapter in the book, and it's called Soaring with Eagles. And one of my favorite quotes is, "You can't hang out with chickens and expect to soar with eagles." So I had to write about that because it's so important. It makes me laugh every time I think of it. But there's actually what's called the law of the group. In psychology, there's what's called the law of the group. The law of the group is essentially you become the average of the people with whom you associate. So if you, Gina, come into the friend group with a 1 to 10, 10 is the most positive you are, 1 is the least positive you are. If you come in at a level 8 of positivity and I come in at a 4 of positivity, well, you're going to decrease to 6, and I'm going to raise up to 6 as well. So all of a sudden I increase, you decrease. And so that's why it's so important to be mindful of the people with whom you associate. I'm sure they're wonderful people, but if you find that their behaviors or their perceptions or their comportments, how they handle themselves is not in the direction you want to go, you might want to be mindful of how much time you spend with them. Once again, fantastic people, but not everybody can go where you're going, because if there's something in you that is specifically for you, you have to pave the way because no one else can pave it for you.
Very, very true. We talk about, energy vampires and energy batteries. What I would say is, if you are the person who's at an 8, one of the things to recognize is you don't have to dip to a 6. You can shift your conditioning and your perspective, that you maintain your positivity no matter who's around you. Might be a bit of a challenge, but you can.
So can.
I'd like to spend the last bit of the show talking about the 9 categories that you had. And you've mentioned 1 or 2, but I think there are others that would be worth mentioning. But before we do, I'm just very conscious that people need to know where to find you. So where can they find you? Let's get that out in the open straight away so we don't lose track of that.
Thank you so much. You simply go to jamesmillerlifeology.com and you can find all the information about me. You can see where you can find all the broadcasting places where you can hear my show. It's also archived on every major podcast, or actually every podcasting platform. So simply search James Miller Lifeology on any of your podcasting platforms, or once again, go to jamesmillerlifeology.com and you can find all the information there. I'm also very active on Instagram. So simply find me at James Miller Lifeology, and I would love to connect with you. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Brilliant. And the other thing before we go into those 9 categories is, as you know, we're very proud to be members of B1G1, buy one, give one.
Uh-huh.
And we invite our guests to choose a project to donate to. So those of you listening, if you're in business, it's a great way of making a difference in the world in a very manageable and affordable way. So the projects at the moment for the month while we're here is Food for the Hungry, Clean Water, Education, and there's a project to support children in the Ukraine. So wow, which would you like us to donate to on your behalf?
I just did a show with Jane Hyatt, who works with the Ukrainian children, and it was a fantastic story. In fact, I would like to connect you with her as well. It was wonderful. I would like to donate to the Ukrainian children.
Thank you.
It's hard.
I know they're all very good, but
I know.
For those of you that are listening, either to the live show or to one of the recordings, every 100 listeners, we donate a meal to the hungry. So please spread the word. I'd like to be in a position where we're giving so many meals away.
Yes.
And you can make a difference simply by listening to the show. And we all need to do our bit. In fact, tomorrow I go to the airport. I'm hosting a Ukrainian refugee. It's going to be quite an adventure. She speaks no English and I speak no Ukrainian. So it's going to be quite interesting.
Interesting.
But anyway, let's spend the rest of the show looking at your categories and what those involve.
Thank you. So in this book, Life Lessons, You Are the Expert on Your Life, which is the workbook, I broke it up into 9 categories, like you said. So let me read those very quickly. The 9 categories are: when your emotions overwhelm you, improving your communication, blindsided by life, improving your relationships, moving on with your life lessons, identifying self-sabotage, creating your future, and tackling the holidays. So this book is broken down into those 9 categories, and there are 52 chapters. So you can either read it front to back like a quote normal book, a regular book, or you can do it as a workbook where you can find whatever it is you need in the moment. Because as we know, life happens to all of us. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. Let me go to this book. Let me see this chapter here. Oh, this is a good one. So I can read it this way, and then I can fill out the prompts, or either read the prompts and answer them aloud, or I can actually use it as a workbook and write it down. So that's how I broke this book up. So it's multiple ways in which it can be read that is very helpful for the reader.
I think that's a really important principle these days. People are time short, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And often very pressured. But the other thing is, just reading a book, that can go over your head, and at the time it's really helpful, but it doesn't get actually embedded into your life. And so we were talking before we recorded this about creating intentional workbooks where people embed the principles into their life. And you're just thinking about the holidays and how stressful those can be, because people have such high expectations, don't they?
Exactly.
I do a 12-day of Christmas or holiday series.
Oh my gosh.
So what are the principles for you around the holidays?
Well, let me read the chapters real quickly. There's 4 of them. Dysfunctional family holiday reunions, setting time and expectations during the holiday season, overcoming your holiday blues. Many of us, the holidays can be a very triggering time, very depressing time. So what do you do about that? Yeah. I talk about why your New Year's resolutions typically fail. And then the last one is setting realistic holiday expectations. And so those 4 or 5, those are really important, because a lot, like you said, a lot happens. So much emotion is there. So much history is there, especially when you're with family members. And to really understand how to be intentional and how to prepare for that. I think that's one of the hardest things, is often because everything is so a whirlwind of gifts and the holidays, and get caught up in the festivities, that we forget to take that moment to reflect, to say, yes, this is important, but how do I want to feel? So I always help people reverse engineer something. After you spend time with your family, how do you want to feel? And more than likely, we want to feel pretty good. So how do I make sure that I can then reverse engineer it? So before the holiday starts, before I see that family member, how can I make sure that I speak in a way that I know will get me to the end result of feeling good? So if that is, I know, let's say I have a cousin or someone in my family who says something that antagonizes me all the time. How do I prepare myself? So let me role play that. So I'll look in the mirror and say, okay, this person's probably going to say this or talk about this topic. How am I going to respond? So when I can practice saying whatever it is my response will be, I'm not caught off guard. I'm not all of a sudden ready to just start arguing again. So it's important to be intentional and mindful and prepare yourself for how the holiday is going to be. So either that's looking at ideal expectations, learning how to set healthy boundaries, figuring out ways in which you can enjoy the holidays on your terms, as opposed to getting caught up in the whirlwind of what the holidays have been traditionally in the past.
Such sound advice. The issue of saying to people, we all want to enjoy it. I don't want to be a slave in the kitchen. You do the carrots, you do the potatoes, and so on, and let's share that.
Yes.
And if Uncle Fred is a nightmare when he's drunk a bottle of whiskey, then make sure that you offer him plenty of food with the drink, or that you manage the amount that people are drinking.
Exactly.
Simple things like that can make a difference, can't they?
It certainly can. And that way the holidays are in your terms, not in anybody else's.
Absolutely. So choose another chapter to share with us as we come to the end of the show. Which for you, of the things that you've not spoken about, of the things that you think people need to hear this in order to recognize that this is what they need?
Oh, thank you. One of them that I think about is called mediocrity, the dream killer. Often we don't realize that there's so much mediocrity in our life. It doesn't mean that you as the individual are mediocre, but the choices and the mindset and the lifestyle that we've created, the habits we've created, have just created mediocrity. So anytime someone has a thought, gosh, I just can't imagine doing this again, or I am so bored right now, or oh, it's another day. That, unfortunately, is a sign of mediocrity. So you have to really look at, what is it about my life where I didn't feel mediocre before? Do you want to reflect back on a time that says, oh, I felt really excited about life. This felt really good. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, what did I do? How did I find that energy? And so that's a way to reflect on that, because so many times habits just happen. And when those habits, we can lose our fervor for life. Like I told you beforehand, I found probably the past few months, I had lost a little bit of my fervor. So when I recognize mediocrity, because I'm no different than anybody else, creeps up on all of us. When I recognize that, I really reflected on the areas of my life that I needed to change. And so when you can pinpoint where you have those thoughts and those feelings about that specific aspect of your life, reflect back on a time when you did not feel that way when you did the same thing or roughly the same thing, and figure it out, retweak it, and then move forward, and that mediocrity is gone.
Well, it's again such simple, seemingly simple
Mm-hmm.
advice, but so powerful when people actually employ that on a regular basis. And knowing themselves, leading themselves, taking responsibility for your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and knowing that you can control those. Ultimately,
Yes.
that's the only thing you have control over, isn't it?
All you have
You.
control over. Yes, it certainly is.
James, it's been an absolute joy to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Just remind people again where they can find you.
Once again, thank you so much for allowing me to be a guest on your show today. You can simply find me at jamesmillerlifeology.com. And if they'd like to purchase the book, Life Lessons, You Are the Experts on Your Life, a workbook, anytime between May 31st and June 13th, you may do pre-sales on Amazon. Anytime after June 14th, you can buy it at your favorite bookstore, digital, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any other place. And so please reach out to me once again at jamesmillerlifeology.com, or simply reach out to me on Instagram at jamesmillerlifeology.
Thanks, James. And thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can listen to the replay and through the archive. Please spread the word so we can help B1G1 and join me on the next show. You take care. Bye-bye now.